All right, if you're just joining us on YouTube, welcome back to the Mr. Sinn channel. Today, we're going to be talking about Unit 6, Urbanization, Cities and Urban Land Use Patterns. So this is going to be a cool unit. There is a lot in here, so make sure you get the guided notes. You can find that ultimate review packet, follow along, and take some notes. If you don't want to use my guided notes, no worries. You can use a notebook and a piece of paper. The more we handwrite and stuff, the better it is. Cool. So let's get started. Going on to our next question there. Real quick, as we're going, just a reminder tomorrow, as a thank you. So if you don't want the packet, I don't care, not at all. But this is kind of a thank you to those who have gotten the packet. We're going to be doing an exclusive live stream tomorrow at 3 p.m. We're going to do Unit 7 then at the normal time at 7 p.m. So Unit 7 will be at 7 p.m. But at 3 p.m. tomorrow, I'm going to do a live stream just for people with the test packet or that ultimate review packet. And it's going to go over every theory and model. Now, if you've been watching all these live streams, we've already been talking about it, but this one is just specifically for that. We'll do a little Q&A and have some fun there. So if you're interested, by all means, check it out. They'll be in the packet tomorrow. So to find the stream, you'll have to go to the packet. So you'll go to the packet. That is tomorrow at 3 p.m. So May 5th, 3 p.m. So there you go. All righty. You just got the packet yesterday and you'd recommend it. It was very helpful. Good. I'm glad it was. Good. All right. So starting off, we're going to be talking about urban hearths here. We're looking at a variety of different things where you're talking about site and situation factors. This isn't a major thing to memorize on all the different stuff, but generally speaking, these are areas that originally we had larger population centers form. And a big reason why is because of their site and situation factors, which allowed then for economic development to occur, sedentary lifestyles to occur. And then we continue to see diffusion happen over time. Now, site and situation factors, we've been talking about this in other units. Remember, situation factors are relative. So we're looking at locations surrounding a place. These are these connections between different places. Site factors are thinking about characteristics that are specific to that location, to that place. So if I'm looking at like trade that's occurring, that's going to be more situation. If I'm looking at arable land, that's more of a site factor. So that would be something there to think about. Some people are asking about sedentary. Sedentary is we're staying in one spot. So yesterday for Unit 5, we talked about sedentary and nomadic lifestyles. Nomadic, we're on the move. So like pastoral nomads move with their animals. Sedentary farming would be like mixed crop livestock. We're staying in one area. So that would be sedentary. All righty. Next thing I want to highlight here, we got this AI picture here for you to think about, is we're about to go into a bunch of different types of cities. And one of the things that we're going to be seeing here is how changes in transportation, communication, population, migration, economic development, government policies all influence urbanization. And that's right from the CED. So we have to make sure we understand this. So over time, as we've continued to see more advancements in our technology, in our communication, in our infrastructure, remember infrastructure we'll talk about later. This is going to be our bridges, our roads, our public utilities, our electrical grids. These are things that allow our society to function. But as we've continued to see advancements in these, our cities have started to change. Their land use patterns have shifted. How we're building our cities has changed, where people are living. All of that is influencing here. So just you're going to see these themes throughout this video as we continue to look at it. So make sure you're kind of paying attention there. All right. Two terms that we need to be familiar with is megacity and metacity. So I got the definitions up there on the screen that you can see. One of the things, a megacity is going to have more than 10 million residents. A metacity is more than 20 million. So just have an understanding about that. Don't mix those up. So you want to make sure you keep them separate there. One thing to note is what we're seeing here is that the majority of this big economic, this big urban development that's starting to happen, we're starting to see more and more of these major cities shifting into semi-periphery areas or periphery. That can kind of connect into our demographic transition from Unit 2, because what we're starting to see is this big population growth is happening. So we're seeing some changes in the world right now when we're looking at our global landscape here. So something just to kind of think about as we start to see some of our core countries, some of these big cities, they're not growing as fast as some of our other areas are. All right. So we're about to get into a bunch of different urban and rural kind of settlements. And one of the things that we have to understand that is happening is as more economic development has occurred, and as we've started to see people move farther in that demographic transition model, we've seen this concept of urban decentralization. And this is a movement of a population moving away from urban areas. They're going to the peripheral. Essentially, what starts to happen then is power and money and some of these decisions start shifting as way. They're shifting away from that urban core and going to things like the suburbs. And this is where we're going to get into edge cities and boom burbs and exurbs. So, urban decentralization, if you see that on the AP test, it's referencing this shift that's occurring as the population moves away from these urban areas, resulting in them power and money shifting along with that. Another thing that you're going to see on the AP test for this unit is urban sprawl. So remember, urban sprawl is where we have these cities continue to expand. Let me know in the chat, what are these cities? Anyone know what these cities are? Anyone have an idea? It's the same city. So let me know if anyone knows it. Also, just a reminder again, I'm not really looking at the chat when I'm going over the notes. So I do have, yes. Oh, I almost had. There we go. That was the first one I saw. It is Tokyo. So this would be Tokyo. So we can see this urban sprawl. So Tokyo. Yep. Not New York, not Seattle. You don't need to memorize that this is Tokyo. This is just an example of urban sprawl. So urban sprawl is a vocab concept you want to be familiar with here. We can see this city here has just continued to grow. So urban sprawl is this unrestricted growth. It's an expansion. Generally, then we start to see it replacing other areas and landforms there. So like agricultural lands all of a sudden now are becoming part of this urban area. Now, one of the things that we see happen as suburbanation happens, as sprawl continues, we see again this decentralization occurs. And we have some new land use forms, boom burbs, exurbs, and edge cities. You can see the definition here if you're taking notes. But a boom burb, remember, we have this rapidly growing area, rapidly growing suburban area, and it develops kind of its own unique identity. In exurb is going to be a settlement that is going to be kind of outside of that suburban area. So a suburban area is not going to have the highest density. So it's going to be outside there. And these are going to, again, remain fairly connected to that metro area, to that urban area. Exurbs, remember, typically have a really low population density. So they'll have a lot larger of lot sizes, so people will have more access to land, and there's less goods and services. So they're going to be connected to that urban area, or maybe a place like an edge city, because they don't have as many of their own goods and services. So you'll have to drive more there. In edge city, then, if you're taking notes, I'll put it back up there, is going to be our settlement here that has kind of its own economic district and generally located by some beltway or major highway. So this would be like a beltway, major highway here, this beltway kind of going across here. So edge cities often have a really high concentration of businesses, shopping centers, different goods and services. They're a little bit more almost independent. They still will have some things that they're lacking. They'll have to connect back to that urban core, but they're starting to have more specialization that's occurring. And so these are important to understand the concept. So on the test, let's say you get a scenario or a picture or an image. If you can understand the terms and kind of what's happening with life in these areas, the amount of goods and services, the density, then you could connect to any example that the College Board throws at you because you understand the concepts there. Another concept that you want to be familiar with is a world city. These are cities that are going to be connected to other cities, and it's going to be through a variety of linkages and networks. So these are cities that have major, significant influences on global politics, economies, and culture. Let me know in the chat. I'll quick look back at the chat. What would be an example of a world city? So do we have an example of a world city? So let's see here. What do we got? London. London would be an example of a world city. Yes. New York would be an example of a world city. Correct. Yeah, a lot of New Yorks, a lot of Londons. Tokyo. Tokyo. Yes, some people are saying countries. Remember, it has to be actually Paris it has to actually be a city, not a country. But these are connected. And these cities, if something happens in these cities, it will generally have a ripple effect across the world, and especially in the countries that they're located in. These also, too, will act as kind of in the hierarchy of cities. So remember, if we're talking about like diffusion and a hierarchical diffusion, these will be kind of that top point of power. And then we'll see like diffusion occur downwards. So like a fashion trend starts in Paris, eventually it goes to New York City. Then eventually it goes to the surrounding areas. So these are very influential cities. If something happens in one, there's going to be this ripple effect that's going to occur. Another thing that I want to make sure you understand and kind of connecting back, linkages. Again, you might see this term. I mentioned it yesterday on our Unit 5, but these are just these connections between different places, these industries. So think of communication, migration, these goods and flows of services, but linkages would be our airports. We have connections that are made, and it allows for diffusion to occur. Excuse me. My voice is definitely kind of losing it a little bit. All right. Sorry. Going on to our size and distribution. So here we're looking at a variety of different cities. You want to be familiar with the primate city and the rank size rule. So these are two that you want to be familiar with. I have an example up there of both. All right. Woo. Just had some water. That helps. Break of bulk points. I realized I mentioned it. We will talk about that for Unit 7. I'm just using vocab to connect things. I am sick. My voice is slowly going, but that's okay. We're going to power through. All right. So primate city, though, this is where we have the largest city is twice the population of that second largest city. Now, one thing to note here, again, it's important to understand, like, so what's the implication of this? What's happening here? Well, a primate city, if we have one city that really has the majority of the population, they have the majority of goods and services. They have the majority of opportunities. That means we have some unequal economic development occurring here. Residents of that state are going to have to travel farther to be able to get goods and services. If anything happens to that primate city too, that state is going to be in trouble. South Korea has a primate city. Mexico has a primate city. If I make this full screen quick, I should have made these bigger and separated it so you could see it a little easier. But here's the population for like Mexico and Mexico City, significantly larger than Mexico's other cities there. So this would be a primate city. On the other hand, rank size rule. We have this kind of graphic that I took from one of my videos here. We're looking at that largest city. The population is kind of to the nth degree. You're not going to have to do math on this test. So don't worry about the math, but understand like the concept. So for here, our first city, that second largest city is going to be half the population of the largest. The third is a third. The fourth is a fourth. The fifth is a fifth. What this is showing is that we have more kind of just even development. Our goods and services will be more spaced out. One city, yes, we still have a largest city, but it doesn't have as big of an impact on the entire place. We have a lot more goods and services dispersed throughout our state, which means generally more economic development has occurred. We have a little bit more diversity in different things, and diversification of where money and goods and services are located, which by spreading it out allows more access to different citizens. So that would be something just to understand there when we're looking at the primate city and the rank size rule. So those definitely could come up. Another thing to realize is this concept of interdependence. And I've mentioned interdependence in some of our previous reviews. And again, it's a vocab term that's not necessarily like a theory or anything, but it connects to a lot. This is just talking about this reliance, these connections of different groups of people, of organizations, regions, of states. So when something is interdependent, like when we eventually get into Unit 7 tomorrow, we're looking at global trade. That means that things are connected and that we rely on each other. So if I have an interdependence with another country, I'm relying on them, they're relying on me. And realize cities also can have interdependence. So I wanted to clarify again, interdependence, it's this mutual reliance between groups and organizations or regions where we depend on each other. All right. Up next, we're going to get into size, distribution, and impacts, and we're going to start with the gravity model. We last talked about this in our Unit 2 video when we were looking at Ravenstein's laws of migration. But remember with the gravity model, I'll quick put it on the board for you, or on the screen, not the board. We're not actually in class right now. On here, this is the gravity model. We are looking at the impact that distance has and also the size of all of our cities. So when we're talking here, notice that the larger our city is, the bigger the pull, the more opportunities that they're going to have. And so the smaller has less opportunities, less people are interested in going there. And so even if city 1 and city 2 here are farther away, they actually have a stronger pull factor. More people are going to be motivated to go back and forth here because there's more opportunities compared to city 2 and 3. Even though they're closer, there's less opportunities there. people aren't as interested in connecting. So understand that when we're looking at this, this can impact cities and how they are developing and the interactions that they occur. So those world cities, those primate cities are going to have a lot of pull factors. A lot of people are going to be visiting these areas. They're going to have a lot of influence. Those smaller areas like an exurb, not as many people are going to be interested in that. Again, you're still going to have some, but not as many. Also, too, just a quick highlight. Notice how these arrows go both ways for all of them. This is showing that counter that migration stream. So Ravenstein noticed this in Unit 2. Whenever we are continuing to have interactions, so if we have a migrant going from one place to another, they start to interact, and eventually it motivates people to go back. These areas are connected. All right. Let's go on to our next part here, which is going to be Kristaller central place theory. Again, I will get to chat. I'll get to super chats and all that. Just right now, I'm focusing on the notes. So I'm focusing on going over the notes. If you're saying stuff, I apologize. I'm not really looking at it, but I will go back and look at them. I'll look at it later. All right. So first part of the central place theory I want to highlight is two terms, threshold and range. And to get a little interaction, anyone know threshold and range? What is the difference of these concepts? So we're talking about the central place theory, threshold and range. These can connect to a variety of different things. So now looking at the chat, what do we got here? Threshold and range. Does anyone remember? Let's see. Range, the maximum distance people are going to travel. Yes. So it's that distance people will travel for a certain good or certain service. So those are definitely going to be with range. Threshold, let's see. Threshold is going to be how many people are needed to support it. So if we're talking about a store, how many people are needed to actually support that store or that business? So range, again, is that distance. Threshold is the amount. And the cool thing here is it tells us a lot about different companies and different services and businesses. This is why, for example, you will see so many McDonald's and so many Subways and Starbuckses in an urban area. Their range is really small. They're convenience products. People aren't going to travel that far. If it's convenient to them, they'll go. And so their range is actually really small. So it'll seem like weird because you're like, well, why is there so many in the same store in one city? I mean, how many Starbucks do we really need in a city? But they're actually in their own kind of regions there. They're functional regions because, again, we have that center point, that node. So remember, functional regions, that's unit 1. Connecting back, all this stuff connects. So that would be why. The threshold there, again, too, one thing to point out is for a threshold, these are the people that are actually going to be going to this area. So if I'm a business that's going to be selling, like if I'm Tesla and I'm selling these expensive cars, my threshold, I need to have a certain amount of people that are in that range, but I also need to have a certain level of economic status. So there's different components that could go into threshold when we're looking at medium income. We're going to use a lot of our quantitative data there. So like the census information to understand. So businesses use all these things to decide where they should open up a new store. Now, the central place theory doesn't just connect to businesses and services. We can also connect it to cities and urban hierarchy. So I want to show the central place theory here. Don't get overwhelmed when we're looking at it. So generally what Kristaller noticed is when we're looking at our urban hierarchy, so when we're looking at how cities, towns, market towns, villages, all these different things are ranked. And again, here, urban hierarchy, we're ranking by the size, the influence of our settlements. So like cities are going to have a higher population, more opportunities, more services. Here, they're going to be creating like a region. They have a lot of pull factors. Notice that on the bottom of our hierarchy is like villages. And notice when we're looking at this, they're all surrounding either like a market town or a town or the city. They have the least goods and services. They have the least pull factors. And because they have the least goods and services, they need to be connected to a larger settlement so that they can get the support they need. And so we can see as we expand farther away from our city, generally our nodes here are going to be these larger settlements because they have more goods and services that can support. And Kristaller used the hexagon so that way everything like kind of perfectly aligned. If you watch my video on YouTube, or if you did, I talked about like the South. I researched a couple different studies where I looked at the American South and how it developed and grew and actually kind of connects into Kristaller central place theory. So we can use Kristaller central place theory to understand the location of different settlements. We can use it to understand the location of different businesses, this range, this threshold. It's all dealing with the population size. It's dealing with our goods and services. So understand that our spatial distribution of settlements and goods and services can connect into this theory. So it's a really cool theory that looks at a variety of things and gets used in real life by a variety of different people. All right, let's go on to our next part, which is everyone's favorite part, the urban models. Yes. So for time's sake, I'm going to give you just really quick summaries of these. I'll leave the models full screen on the screen so you can just see them while I'm talking. So I won't have my face on during this part. But there's 7 different urban models that we got to review. And one thing when I'm going over them that I want you to focus on, one, think about how these models maybe have changed. Are they still as accurate? Are they not as accurate? That could be like explain the degree question on an FRQ. Also, too, what is happening with density? What's happening with technology? What's happening with our infrastructure? Each of these are approaching things in a different way. And eventually, when we get into some of like Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and East Asia, also focus on some of those historical and political influences as we're looking at like colonialism and imperialism and how they have shaped some of our cities' spatial distributions. So, first model coming up. Here we go. So notice right away, we got that CBD. This is our concentric zone model. So generally here, what we're seeing, that CBD is going to be the highest density. As we move out, you can see our density is decreasing. Um, Over time, what starts to kind of happen here is we have a lot of different public and private services that are going to be surrounded. They're going to be in that CBD area. The older homes are kind of surrounding it. The newer developments, the newer homes are going to be located away from that CBD. So they're going to be located kind of out here, the zone of better residence. If we're talking about out here outside, this would be people that live outside of this urban area, but they are going to commute in. So they're commuting into that urban area. So that's one of the things to kind of point out for here. That next better residence generally has those newer homes. And oftentimes, too, because the density is lower out here, they're going to be a little bit more dispersed. So you're more likely to have a single family home with like a front yard and a backyard. Now, our next model that we're going to look at is the Hoyt sector model. A big focus here. We still have our CBD. We also, too, and just quick take this off so it's not blocking anything. We still have that CBD. Oh, notice now, though, right down the middle here is this transportation. And surrounding this area, too, is industry. So you think about like a big highway cutting through a city. And what is located on that highway? Well, oftentimes car dealerships, a lot of restaurants, different stores. A big reason for this is because it's really easy to get goods in and out of this area. It's also very easy for citizens to access these businesses since we are right off of this highway. So it's very easy to access there. So transportation is a big component. This model kind of highlights that, how with infrastructure being developed in transportation, how that has changed the spatial layout of cities. So that's something to kind of figure out and think about. Today, we kind of, again, have seen this model start to become dated too, just because our transportation systems have continued to update. And also, again, the CBD has lost some of its importance as we've continued to see more people work from home and newer methods of communication starting to adopt. Our next one is a multiple nuclei model. So this one here, we have multiple kind of CB. We have our main CBD, but we have multiple nodes. Think of it that way, not CBDs, nodes. So these center points. And generally what's happening is people who work in these areas are going to gravitate around them. So each node here is actually going to attract and push away different individuals. So if we're looking at jobs that generally maybe lower income individuals are working at, they're going to gravitate and live near that area. If we're talking about like a hospital or office buildings, we're going to see people who work in those sectors gravitate and work near there. So we can see, depending on where you're living, we can see kind of nodes here, and then people start to gravitate around here. So we still have that CBD. This model does a lot of a better job of kind of highlighting some of the complexity that happens in our spatial layouts as our cities continue to advance. All right, our next one is the galactic model. So Star Wars Day, so the Galactic Empire. Woo, May 4th. Here we go. Got to go watch Bad Batch. But anyways, here again, this model is actually factoring in transportation and also technologies. One thing to note, this is one of the models too that actually kind of highlights edge cities, these areas that are going to kind of develop on this beltway, this big kind of interstate that's happening right around here. So a little bit more complexity here. Again, this allows for people to get in and out of the cities in that urban area. So something to think about. Infrastructure is a big thing here. City of Atlanta kind of follows this model. So in my video, I actually kind of highlighted the map, showed the different parts of it. We can also see too, again, we have different industries and services that are being offered at different parts here. So these edge cities, these areas kind of specialize. So we have some spots that are connected to like commercial, industrial. We can see office spaces. So again, highlighting a little bit more contemporary city structures. All right, next model I'm going to highlight is the Latin American city model. One thing to remember here, we can see the impact of colonization. So we can see this influence of Europeans coming in, particularly with the layout here. So this market, this CBD here, during the colonial era, when a lot of cities were being set up, they were always centered around this like central plaza, this square. And there we had government buildings, religious buildings. And a big component of that was because the conquistadors actually believed God should be the focus of all these societies. So is at the center point there. So that's why a lot of these cities still have a church, a big church in these areas. We can also see too, realize this is a unique thing. We have this spine connecting outward. So we're going to have generally some more higher end places here. We might see some spots of like gentrification. We'll talk more in depth about that a little later on. But that kind of connects back to some of these segregated neighborhoods based on wealth, again, connecting back to colonization and history there. So understand that this layout is kind of unique. The disamenity zone, when we're seeing that, so these are these areas. I saw some people kind of asking about that. This is an area that residents are living in extreme poverty. Generally, they're lacking infrastructure like water, power, sewage. So we have extreme poverty here, a lot of lack of just basic necessities. We might have some squatter settlements there or informal settlements, people who don't actually have an ownership to the land. And that kind of gets into our next concept here. So informal settlements, squatter settlements, favelas, there's a variety of different ways we can word it, but these are areas in where we have people living and they don't actually have legal authorization. So they're generally going to lack this basic infrastructure. We also might see more people part of the informal economy here, a concept from Unit 7. So the informal economy, remember, is talking about jobs that are not protected, they're not regulated or monitored by the government. And so this generally is happening in informal settlements. So informal settlements are going to come up in the next couple of models that we have. So I want to just kind of highlight that term in particular because you're going to keep seeing it. All right, we'll go on to our next model. I realize there's a ton of models, so I apologize there. But our next model here, we're looking at the Sub-Saharan Africa model. One really unique thing that I want to highlight is this 3 CBD. We have our colonial CBD, the traditional, and the market. And when you're noticing this, notice that when we're talking here, the colonial CBD, you can kind of see this grid pattern. So this grid pattern is very much a European thing. As we get then into our traditional CBD, we can start to see the grid patterns kind of going away. Then the informal one, our third one, this is a market zone. There's a lot of informal economic activity happening here. We no longer have the grid at all. The other thing that we can see as a legacy aspect of these cities is, again, from colonization. It could be apartheid, segregation, but we have ethnic neighborhoods. Notice also how these roads are set up. In a lot of these cities are dividing areas. And so this is all remnants of colonization, some places because of that Berlin Conference that we talked about in Unit 4. We also can see, too, again, a lot of squatter settlements, squatter areas, these informal satellite townships. These are going to be areas where people are living where we don't have those utilities. And a lot of people might not actually own the land. One thing, too, to point out, let's quick connect back. So when we're looking at this, one of the reasons why our informal settlements for Sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America are forming on the outside can actually connect back to Unit 2 as well. So these areas generally have a higher population growth rate. We know stage 2 countries, we have a lot of urbanization that's happening. So a lot of people are moving to these cities. There isn't a place to live. So we start to see these cities expand through urban sprawl, and a lot of them are in informal areas. So we can kind of connect back to Unit 2 here, where we can see the impact of migration patterns based on that economic development, and then how that's shaping our urban areas. So, all right, we got one more model. I realize I'm going fast, but hopefully this is helping out. Again, I'm not looking at the chat right now. I'm just kind of going over all the content. When we get to the Kahoot, I'll look at the chat more. So Southeast Asian city model here, notice we don't have a CBD. So if you're remembering like what's unique here, this is definitely a unique thing. We have a port, and the port is for a variety of reasons. Part of it's because of the geography. So a lot of these cities are just located on an island or a peninsula. Another one is because these cities often developed as trading posts. So this would be that historical connection that we can make, that a lot of Western countries wanted to trade with these different cities. And the last one is, as urbanization kind of happened, we expanded off of these ports, since that's the economic development, and that is all of the production and stuff that was happening there. So a lot of influences from colonial powers and foreign states. We can even see this alien commercial zone. So these are areas meant to kind of facilitate and promote trade with other countries. But we have this government control zone here. It's kind of overseeing things, just making sure there isn't some shady business or influence that they don't want. We can also too see we have some mixed density. So this is going to be, we have a variety of different income statuses and stuff mixed there. As you get farther and farther back, we get into more agricultural stuff. And we do have some squatter settlements as well. But a big thing that's unique here is we don't have that CBD. So kind of realize that for some of the uniqueness. All right. So those are our urban models. Hopefully your head isn't spinning. If you do need more help with the urban models, you can check out my ultimate review packet. You can also check out my video. It goes more in depth. If you're looking at this, I think it's 6.7. I'm blanking on the topic video of it, but it's those internal structures there. That one goes in a little bit more depth to it. The models, they could be on the test. They're listed in the CED. But if you're panicking, you're like, I have no idea right now about a ton of stuff, maybe wait a little bit on the models, focus on these themes and these patterns. That could be more important. So one of the things that we saw with the models, and I'm going to keep going on. Again, I'm not going to look at chat right now, but one of the things we saw is density changed. And this happens for not just our models, but all different urban areas and rural areas, to be fair. This also connects into a concept known as the density gradient. This is this gradual change in the density. We're going from an urban area to the periphery. So the core in that center is going to have a higher density. As we move it farther and farther out, our density continues to decrease. So I have a kind of an example here that you can see. Again, nothing crazy, but as you're closer here, density is higher. Again, we're going to move farther and farther out. So one of the things that you want to have an understanding of is how the density of an area could impact it. So high density areas, generally here, individuals, we have a lot of people living in an area. Density connecting back to unit 2 as well. We're looking at how many people are living in this area. So we have people that are very close. Goods and services are very close. A lot of people might not drive their own cars. They're going to rely more on public transportation here. Things are close. And so we can have a lot of public services at our disposal. These areas generally are going to do a lot of planning to try and make sure that things are building accordingly. If they don't, they're going to run into a lot of issues because of how many people are living here. Public transportation is normally prevalent here. Generally, we can see cities with a high density area are very vibrant, lots and lots of different people and cultures. But again, if we have poor urban planning, that is going to create some problems here. And that could create food deserts. It could create uneven economic development, unequal social opportunities, and that could create a variety of different issues for cities. Now, as we keep moving out, eventually we get to medium density areas. So if at the core is our high density, the medium is located here. Now, all of a sudden, we don't see as many skyscrapers. We're not seeing buildings as packed. Our density still, it's not low, so we still have a lot of people. But now we're starting to see things shift. Maybe now we have some low-rise apartments or multifamily homes. We'll have some single-family homes that start to appear as well. They'll have a front yard and a backyard if we're looking at the United States, but generally not the largest. So here, people are going to start driving a little bit more. You still feel like you're kind of close to that urban area, but it's starting to feel more of like a suburban feel. Restaurants, stores, things of that are spaced out a little bit more. So we have a little bit more space, a little bit more driving. Now, eventually, we do get to our next one, which is going to be low density. The different densities, again, if you notice, I'm just kind of trying to explain the different themes with them or the different ways in which they impact an area and the people living there. That's kind of the thing to focus on here. So when we get to low density, here we have a lot of single family homes. We maybe have a few apartments, but they're not that tall. We also have a lot of space. So that average lot size that an individual has is a lot bigger compared to a medium or high density area. Generally, the higher our density, the smaller the lot size. So we're not going to build out as much, but we're going to build vertical. So we're going to build a lot taller. We're going to build up or down. We're going to go below. And that's because space is limited. So here you'll have like a big Target. You'll have a big parking lot there. We have a variety of different things that are spaced out. And this leads to more people driving. So we're having a lot more personal vehicles. Generally, there's not as much public transportation out here. We have a lot more green space as well. So just understand how the different densities can impact these areas and how they change stuff. Now, throughout this video, I've kind of been referencing infrastructure. And I want to quick highlight what infrastructure is so you remember it. Because this could come up with food in our agriculture unit. It could come up in our industrial unit. It could come up in this unit. Infrastructure is these key structures that actually help society function. This is going to be our roads, trains. This is going to be our utilities. Our society needs it to function. And the location and the quality of a city's infrastructure has a direct effect to economic development, social development, and spatial patterns for all countries. Societies that invest in infrastructure generally are going to see more economic development. They're going to see a higher standard of living. At the same time, the more infrastructure we have, the costs go up. And infrastructure isn't one of those super exciting things for a lot of states. So it's costly. It costs a lot. And it's not necessarily like for politicians going to win a bunch of votes. So generally, we can see sometimes not enough people put money into infrastructure. And when it fails, we can see, unfortunately, some disasters happen. Like my state, we had a bridge collapse years ago. That's because we weren't putting enough into our infrastructure, our roads and our bridges there to make sure we maintained them. So if it does fail, there's some pretty big consequences that could come. So realize that, the importance of it, how it can facilitate growth, also how it changes the spatial layouts. One actually example of that. So if we look at the United States, our cities and settlements are very spaced out. I mentioned earlier in the stream, if you go to places like London or just in general in Europe, and you're like, oh, I have to drive an hour to work. Oh, that's going to be a little bit more unheard of. They don't do that. They're closer together. In the US, our interstate system, form of infrastructure here, really changed how we live. Our cities are very spaced out. We drive a lot in the United States. Things aren't right by each other, and that's normal. And that's the impact of some of our infrastructure. Our interstate system changed where people could live. It led to more urban sprawl. It led to them more suburban feels, more rural areas. We're all connected. So that need to be right in that city isn't as prevalent. All right. Next thing we're going into is urban sustainability. And so with urban sustainability, this is getting down to this later half of the unit, but urban sustainability, remember, we're talking about promoting economic growth that's sustainable, social sustainable. We're looking at our environment. Can we create a city in a way that is going to allow the future residents to enjoy all the benefits we have today? We're not depleting the Earth's resources. And when I mention economic sustainability, this is essentially saying, is the city supporting small businesses, entrepreneurs, local development in a way that isn't necessarily exploiting the Earth's natural resources? Like, are we having economic development for all people? Social sustainability. Are we making sure that our communities are safe and inclusive for all residents, that everyone has access to affordable housing, education, and healthcare services? So understand those different things there when it comes to sustainability. We're going to go into now a bunch of different challenges of it and conflicts and things of that. And you're going to get a lot of terms now. And before we do, though, I want to highlight zoning, because this is a big concept that kind of comes up when we're looking at this. So zoning here can happen in a variety of different things. This is how the government is regulating land. So it could be we're zoning it for commercial, agricultural, residential, industrial. What we're trying to do is designate land. And this is going to show what it can be used for. So if it is residential land, you can't build a Walmart in that area. It's zoned for residential. And this helps with urban planning and trying to keep things pretty consistent and make sure that things are on the up and up. One thing, too, that happens is we have governments that can become fragmented. So we have a variety of different governments that have influence, different levels of governments. If you see the term municipalities, these are local governments. These units, they're created by the state or national government. So like a town, a city, a village, these are other governments that are existing there. So one thing to think about when we're looking at the fragmentation of government is the reason why that can create challenges for a city is because if the national government is trying to influence different urban policies, the state's trying to influence, and then the local government, they're just trying to do what they think is best. But you have all these different levels now, and we have counties and regions and all these things happening too. They're trying to influence. that can create a lot of tension and conflict, and it can lead to some messy decisions. Generally, the national government, they can't have that big of influence. They're going to try and offer, hey, if you do this, we'll give you some money. So they're going to connect it to funding. If you don't do it, you don't get the funding. So that can create some issues with running cities as we're looking at it. And that can happen for a variety of different scales there. One quick example too, if you've ever played the game City Skylines, fantastic game, or even SimCity, one of the older ones, they use zoning. So like here you can see, like here we have an industrial zone. The blue is going to be commercial. Here is going to be our residential. These are areas where no one's living yet. Here's our roads, our infrastructure. Again, we can kind of see here, notice this person, when they're developing it, we have all of our commercial along these major highways, these interstates here. That is because it allows for a lot of goods and services to get quickly in and out. So the cool thing, even if some of these video games they play, they use these concepts to be able to actually play the game, because that's how the real world is. And that's the cool thing in this class. All right, here we go. We're going to get into a bunch of different concepts now. We're going to be talking first about mixed land use. So this comes up when we're looking at sustainability. Mixed land use is going to be when we're going to take an area and we're actually going to have multiple different zones in there. It could be commercial, residential, maybe sometimes industrial. These are going to happen generally in medium or high density areas, and it's becoming more and more common. It allows a city to become more walkable. It puts things closer to people. And generally speaking, what's going to happen is on the bottom is going to be our commercial activities. These are going to be your businesses, your stores. And the reason why they're going to be at the bottom of the building is because that's where the foot traffic is. It allows people to quickly get in and to quickly get out. And then stores, they don't care that they're on the street. They like that, even though there's more sound pollution there. Going up, then you might have offices. Again, you have a little bit of a view. They don't need the easy street access because it's just the people who work there are going there. Above that, then, would be the residential. The reason why they're going to be at the top is because then you can charge a higher rent because you have a view. And also that sound, that noise pollution doesn't necessarily get up there as much. So people are able to sleep easier. So with these mixed use buildings, these mixed use areas can create an environment where people can work, they can live, and they can eat, and they can enjoy their lives. And it stops then the need for public transport, or not public transportation, but personalized vehicles. And all of this can create some walkable cities. These are cities, walkable cities that are going to be, people can actually just walk around. Over time, we're continuing to see more and more of these cities try to promote it, where we don't have to have as much traffic, more opportunities, things are closer together. I do want to highlight too, depending on your city, again, some of these cities now are becoming so densely populated that we'll actually have buildings and stuff being built underground. This again is highlighting that high density. If we connect back to that bid rent theory, remember, as we get closer to an urban area, bid rent theory is from unit 5, but it comes back here. As we get closer to it, the price of land is going up. And so people aren't trying to get more and more land. They're going to try to utilize the land they have to the best of their ability. So you might have it where there's a parking garage underneath the skyscraper, goes underneath the whole underground, and then we'll build vertically up. Or we might even have some stores that are underground as well. We're trying to utilize it. Generally, if you're going to have a store underground, though, it's going to be in a high traffic area. So there's a lot of foot traffic there. So you're either going to want to be there or you're going to be on that street level, depending on where the traffic is. All right. Going on to our next thing, we have a variety of terms that I'm going to put on the screen, and I'll make it full screen so you can take some notes here. These are different things that can happen to change that cultural landscape of a city. One of the things that's happening here is with transit-oriented development, the goal here is actually to create more compact cities. This is going to use more mixed-use areas, more pedestrian-friendly communities. So you can see the definition there. We have urban planning that's happening, and we're going to put public transit stations throughout a city. We're trying to reduce that dependence on automobiles. The goal is that people are using more and more of our public transportation. It's reducing then some of the congestion that is on our roads. New urbanism and smart growth policies are very, very similar. So both concepts are trying to create a functional and sustainable urban environment. But new urbanism is more about like specific design, that feel of the neighborhoods. And smart growth policies are a little bit more of a broader approach, where it's trying to manage some of this development and use resources very effectively. So these are both ways, again, trying to promote more walkable cities, trying to make it so that things are closer together and try to utilize space as best as they can. Now, one way in which smart growth policies, one concept that might connect is green belts. So these, depending on where you live, are more frequent or less frequent, depending on where you are. But a green belt is going to be this area of land. And you can see pictures on the screen right now that it's been set aside. We're not going to be then actually developing buildings in these areas. So like London, for example, you can see that map. All these areas have been kind of set aside as green space. So these are a lot more common in Europe, but something to definitely understand there. All right. One next concept that we're going to get into that can come up when it goes to urban sustainability is infilling. Now, this and the reason why cities do it is they're going to be looking at space that's not being utilized. So, like top picture there, you can see kind of this field. We can see some of the skyline right behind. And what's going to be occurring now is we're going to try to redevelop this land. The goal here is we're not trying to actually expand our city's footprint. We're trying to stay and build upwards. And that's reducing urban sprawl. Remember, urban sprawl is that expansion of an urban area, that unrestricted growth. So infilling is a way to actually look, do we have urban blight that's happened? Do we have areas where we have abandoned buildings? Do we have just abandoned lots? How could we repurpose that to try and actually create more walkable cities, build some mixed use buildings there, maybe public transportation, different ways of actually trying to create new development and new growth and opportunities inside our urban areas that would prevent us then from expanding outwards. So the goal here is to not expand a city's footprint. So have an idea about that one. All right. More vocab. We're going to have a lot of vocab. This last part of the unit, there is a ton. So I'll make it full screen. So if you're taking notes, it's easier to see for you. But what we're talking about here, one, we have some slow growth cities. It seems weird. You'd be like, hey, why would a city want to slow their growth? Don't they want to promote their growth? Well, the reason why we have slow growth cities is what they're trying to do is reduce some of this urban sprawl. They want to keep some of their green spaces. They also are trying to make sure they can manage their growth. If we have growth that happens too fast, one of the issues is that we run into more problems. Infrastructure can't keep up. Our utilities can't keep up. We might see more issues with squatter settlements and things of that nature. And so we actually are trying to slow growth here to try and make it so it is sustainable and we can make sure we're building it in a correct way. Growth boundaries get used to also try and create more of a walkable city. So growth boundaries, one of the things here that I want to highlight is one issue that could occur is if I put a growth boundary in effect, that is going to reduce urban sprawl because a growth boundary is saying, hey, you can't build outside of this area. It's protecting some of those farmlands. It's protecting more of those rural areas. The issue could be, though, now I'm going to continue to increase the density inside that urban area, which that could then also increase rent. It could also increase the price of land, which could unfortunately lead to gentrification or different things to occur as lower income residents might not be able to afford living there anymore. Since now land is becoming more scarce. We know what that bid rent theory, when the scarcity goes up and demand is high, the price goes up. The last one there on that term was smart cities. Maybe you see it, maybe you don't. But this is just looking at cities that are going to utilize technology and data. They're trying to reduce their inefficiencies. So over time, what we're starting to see is just cities continue to use new technology to try and improve the quality of life. AI, for example, if we're using automation and computers, all different ways to try and understand, okay, what's happening with traffic during certain times? Could we reroute that? Is there different things we could do to try and increase that standard of living? Now, another concept that you might see on the test is brownfield, and it's going to probably be connected to redevelopment of brownfields. But a brownfield is this abandoned property. And this is an area kind of similar to infilling almost, but these properties in particular were used for industrial or commercial use. And they have been contaminated with pollutants. So it's a little bit more work. It's not as easy as infilling where it's like, all right, we're going to take this open alley or this abandoned building. We'll tear the building down, build a new one. Here we have to get rid of this hazardous pollutants. And the reason why a lot of cities will redevelop brownfields is by redeveloping them. Again, now it allows more land to be used by people. It just takes a little bit more time and money. So like if there's an abandoned gas station, cleaning that area up, making it suitable for residential or commercial use, then allows more people to have space in the city. So have an understanding of brownfields. They definitely could come up on the test. All right. Next questions that we're going to get to, or the next concepts, are actually going to deal with segregation. And I've already mentioned one of the terms, and I'll put the screen up again so you can see the different stuff here. But one is post de facto segregation or de facto segregation. So this is segregation that is occurring where there isn't necessarily a law or regulations that's causing it. What we are starting to see here is that there's people that are separated, and it's generally either by racial, ethnic, or socioeconomic lines, but it's not actually a current law or regulation. Now, some people will point out that, well, in the past, we've had things like redlining. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Blockbusting, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And that has led to these things. So even though some of our laws might not now be requiring people to live in certain areas, we used to have different policies that did do that. And so that impact is still here. Gentrification, on the other hand, if you see gentrification on the test, there's pros and cons on all these different things here when we're talking about gentrification. But this is where we have more affluent individuals moving into a neighborhood. So you can kind of see in this picture here, these areas look a lot more modern. We have this house kind of here, development starting to occur. What happens then is the price of land goes up, the price of rent goes up, taxes for people go up. And eventually then what starts to happen, lower income individuals unfortunately can't afford it anymore and they get pushed out. And this can cause tension to develop in some of these neighborhoods. And a lot of these individuals who can no longer afford their area, rightfully so, are upset because they've lived there their whole lives. All of a sudden, things start getting better, more stores start coming in, and now all of a sudden they get pushed out of their neighborhood. This can also lead to placelessness to occur. So, one thing you want to understand is that sometimes when cities are doing these urban initiatives, whether it be new urbanism or smart growth policies, they're trying to reduce urban sprawl. They're trying to improve the walkability. They want to try and increase transportation and want to increase mixed use development. It's all good, but it can also result in things like gentrification. It could result in a loss of this unique characteristics of these places. So, and that could create placelessness. If we lose all the things that make these neighborhoods unique, well, we could have placelessness. Cool. All right, going on to our next concept. And I already referenced it. It's redlining. I'll leave this up on the screen because you can see an example of it. So redlining is going to be, when we're talking about this process of essentially discriminating against people on the color of their skin. It used to be practiced. It's not practiced anymore. However, the impact is still there. So areas generally that were deemed high risk or low risk, the high risk areas had people who are minority groups and they were denied loans, which did not then allow them to be able to get new homes in different neighborhoods. Areas that were green were able to get lower interest rates, were able to get loans, which allowed them to then move and to continue to upgrade their single family homes and property. And this can lead to like generational wealth. So over time, what we started to see is that eventually when redlining went away, well, the people that were in the red areas, their property values were less and they weren't able to sell their homes for as much money. So the people who had been in the green originally were able to continue to resell their homes, get another one, which then allowed them to keep building wealth. So generational wealth could be an issue here. And there's other things that have kind of happened here, but yes, I did just quick look over. I think, yeah, redlining, definitely have a typo there. Oh, well, that's the fun of the wonderful things of live reviews. All right, these are also some concepts that you want to understand. So when we're talking here, blockbusting, we have this discriminatory practice. It contributed to white flight. It contributed to segregation of neighborhoods. I got a lot of text on here, so I'm just leaving it up so you can read it. But when we're talking about it, blockbusting is going to be this area where real estate agents are actually trying to motivate people who are white to leave. They'll sell it at a lower rate to them. Then they'll mark up the price to different minority groups coming in. And it led to white flight, which is this phenomenon of white residents migrating out of an area and going to the suburbs in larger numbers. You also could see environmental injustice and disamenity zones on the test. These are two terms that are listed in that CED. Environmental injustice, remember, is this disproportionate distribution of environmental hazards. So it seems weird to think about environmental injustice. What it's looking at is, where are pollutants located? Are they equally distributed? Are they away from all people? generally, unfortunately, what we see is more marginalized groups or more vulnerable communities are more impacted by some of these environmental pollutants. They're more likely, a low income area is more likely to have a dump near them. They're more likely to have factories near them. And they have less political power to be able to actually fight against that. And so that's one of the things that we can see. Last one there, disamenity zone. We kind of talked about when we were looking at our urban models, but remember, these are areas within a region that lack these public services, that quality infrastructure. There's a higher concentration generally of poverty, crime, maybe sometimes even squatter settlements. So those would be those areas there. And just as a reminder, when we're talking about squatter settlements or informal settlements, these are areas where people have built homes on the land, but they don't actually own them. So they don't have a legal right to the land there. All right. Response to economic challenges. So this again is getting down there towards the end. One way in which cities can actually counter some of these problems is they can use inclusionary zones. These are areas where they're going to put policies in place, these legal requirements. So the government's going to step in and they're going to try to incentivize developers to create affordable housing. They're going to try to create housing for more lower income families. And all of this allows them more mixed income communities to evolve. And when we have mixed income communities, the success rate is a lot higher. If we have communities separated by economics, one issue is then those lower income communities, well, less businesses often locate there since there's less money to be spent. So actually creating more mixed income communities allows businesses to be there, which allows more job opportunities for people, allows more goods and services, and then can lead to more economic growth for all people. So this is a big thing that starts to happen too. When we're looking at the end of the unit, we're talking about urban sprawl and ways we can counter it. And cities do a variety of different things that we've already talked about. Growth boundaries would be one, farmland protection policies, trying to protect those rural areas, those farmlands, not allowing commercial or industrial buildings to come there. The redevelopment of brownfields would be another one. Infilling would be one. And all of these are ways in which a city can be more sustainable, which will help reduce their ecological footprint. If you're not familiar, ecological footprint, that's going to be the amount of land and resources that a city uses to actually support its population. So have an idea of that. Our very last thing is going to connect into data. I'll quick put up on the screen. We've talked about these before, and then we're going to get to our Kahoot. But when we're looking at data here, we're looking at quantitative and qualitative. And there's different ways in which cities can use data here. So qualitative, remember, is going to be opinions. It's not clearly measurable. Excuse me. And quantitative is going to come from like our senses. These are things that are easy to understand. We could debate why they're happening, but we're not necessarily debating the content of it. So for example, like the median income in an area, that would be quantitative. Qualitative would be, well, how do people feel about the traffic? How do they feel about what's happening in society? Do they approve right now of what the government's doing, or do they not? That would be all qualitative. So important to note that. All right, we're going to be switching over to the Kahoot. One reminder, again, we are going to be having that exclusive live stream tomorrow. All I'm going to be doing is going through the theories and models that you need to know. So if you have that ultimate review packet, you can check it out. It's going to be at 3 p.m. We will also have tomorrow at 7 p.m. The Unit 7 review. And then Monday, we're going to have two more bonus live streams that will be for everyone, where I'll take like a practice test and maybe talk about FRQs, because I've seen a lot there. So again, check out that ultimate review packet. Make sure you come tomorrow. If you're not able to come tomorrow, no worries. I will post it once it's done in that ultimate review packet in the packet. So I know YouTube's been putting ads and stuff on. You won't have any ads, so you won't have to worry about that. Cool. All right. If you are watching the recap, enjoy. Check out our live streams tomorrow. We are going to play Kahoot now, so I'm going to cut the video. So thank you very much for watching. I'm Mr. Sinn. As always, have a great day. All right, let's switch over to our Kahoot.